Now we're going to hear from Jacob. We've been hearing a lot of abstract talk about religion and as a motivator for violence, but we need to hear something of the concrete as well. And unfortunately in Sweden we do have some concrete evidence of the use of religion as violence, and Jacob will tell us about that.
Thank you for having me here, and thank you the IRD for hosting this event. I'm really happy to be here. And my name is Jacob Rudenstrand. I work for the Swedish Evangelical Alliance. I sit also on the board of Open Doors in Sweden. And I'm a great admirer of the United States history on religious freedom, so I think it's really appropriate that the US is taking a lead in the fight for religious freedom during this week, as we have seen in the Ministerial. The issue of religious freedom is something that is challenged in many areas in Europe. In the Evangelical Alliance, we work on issues regarding religious freedom when it is, and we bring attention to the global persecution of Christians, but also how Christians are being attacked, Christian refugees are being attacked in Europe and also in Sweden. But we also bring attention to how where we see religious freedom being challenged by an ever-increasing secular society. As you probably know, Sweden is considered to be one of the most, or probably the most, secular country in the world, where religion is considered to be something private, something to be pushed away from the public arena, and this is heard often from many politicians and leading journalists. A couple of years ago, the EU, the European Parliament, published a report on human rights and democracy. They publish this report every year, and in the report it said that Christians are now the most persecuted group in the world. And then they added, Christians are routinely suffers persecution in Europe. During the big migrant crisis in 2015, Sweden, together with Germany, received largest numbers of refugees from Syria and Iraq during the ongoing crisis. Sweden is a country of about 10 million citizens. We have a population of 10 million or so. And during the peak of the migrant crisis, 2015, we received 162,877 asylum seekers. For a small country with a small size population, this is a lot. And to just compare to 2018, by October or so, we had 22,000 asylum seekers. So from 162,000 down to 22,000 in just a number of years tells you something about the large number of asylum seekers. While this was laudable, that Germany and Sweden received so many people that fled for their lives, many of the religious conflicts from Syria and Iraq migrated to our countries. People didn't become peaceful, loving, and religious tolerant people just when they crossed one border to another, but we saw a big increase in religious motivated violence, specifically targeted against Christian refugees. This was covered in several news reports, both in Germany and in Sweden, but there were no serious government-led investigation into this. So in 2016, Open Doors Germany took it upon themselves to do a survey on the number of incidents where they saw Christians being attacked. They could record 743 incidents in Germany. The year after that, in Sweden, After several news reports in much of media, not just Christian media but secular media, of how Christian families had to flee asylum centers for another asylum center, converts from Muslim background believers were stabbed. We had an incident in my own church where a man that was supposed to be baptized on one Sunday, he didn't appear. We later found out that on the day he was supposed to be baptized, he had put on a cross and he was stabbed at the asylum center by his fellow countrymen. Another case in 2015, a man named Amir. He was originally from Syria. He was a Christian refugee. He lived at a refugee home in eastern Sweden. And according to a local newspaper, a 26-year-old jihadist who lived at the same asylum center threatened to slaughter Amir's family and cut his throat and harm his family back in Syria. And he threatened to kill him. And when the police came around, and this is the quote from the newspaper, I fled the war to avoid this kind of thing. And the man that had threatened him, he was eventually sentenced to probation and fined just $900, equivalent to Swedish kroner. Reports like this surfaced routinely in several news media around Sweden, and no serious government-led investigation were initiated. So Open Doors Sweden in 2017 copied the methodology of Open Doors Germany and did their own investigation and could report a number of 512 separate incidents, that included death threats, sexual assaults, and other acts of violence. Most victims of these incidents didn't file any police report because of fear, because they come from countries where they can't trust the police, or they were afraid of retaliation because they were still living at the same asylum centers as the people that were attacking them and threatening them. Almost half of these people, there were 123 persons, and out of these they could report 512 incidents. Almost half of these people reported that they had received at least one death threat, and 6% reported that they had been sexually assaulted. Here's a quote from the report. I printed an English version, and I have some copies with me. You can find it at the table back there. Or you can give me my card, and I can send you a PDF version. This is a quote. One time they told my daughter that she was not allowed to eat in the canteen without wearing a headscarf if she wanted to keep her head. One of the survey participants told Open Doors. Another time, and this is another quote, another time they told my son that he was not allowed to have a visible cross around his neck if he wanted to remain in one piece. More than 1/3 of the survey participants mentioned incidents whose perpetrators had been hired by the Swedish Migration Agency. So they were living at asylum centers that were organized by private entities that had received the task from the Swedish Migration Board. So in effect, they had been paid by the Swedish Migration Board to host asylum seekers. And we had incidents reported where the perpetrators were the ones that were working at these centers. And the reaction when it was published, when Open Doors sent this report to the Swedish government, it was really cool. The response was cool. It wasn't any big initiative taken. One MP from the Moderate Party asked our then Culture and Democracy, Minister of Culture and Democracy, who is responsible for both the work against terrorism and enacting action plans for a democratic society. The MP asked her, "What are you going to do about these Christians that are being attacked at asylum centers?" A half year later, the MP, the minister said, "Well, we're preparing an action plan together with the Justice Department." Half a year later, and I asked to receive this action plan. Everything is made public on the Swedish government website, and I emailed the department and I said, "Can you send me the action plan?" The action plan did not mention any word about Christians being persecuted at asylum centers. Just a way of comparison, they mentioned harassment against Muslims 26 times. I don't have anything against work against Islamophobia in Sweden. We have that problem. And we have the problem with mosques being attacked by extreme right-wing criminals. So that's an important issue, but didn't even mention attacks against Christian refugees. Even the statistics mentioned in this report from the National Council of Crime Prevention, which is a government body that provide numbers of hate crime incidents. And hate crime incidents is labeled among others on anti-Semitic hate crimes, Islamophobic hate crimes, and Christophobic hate crimes. It's an official designation. And the statistics that they mentioned in the report, in the action plan, was covered 2011 to 2015. And the increase of attacks based on this Christophobia had increased by 140%. It was black and white in the action plan, but they didn't even comment on the increase. So, meanwhile, the issue of religion and religious belief and religious conversion is tackled in a very naive way in Sweden. Just a way of comparison, the Migration Agency has received large complaints from several churches in Sweden because during the ongoing refugee crisis, several churches, free churches, Catholic churches, and Protestant Lutheran churches received a large number of Muslim believers. Many of them have come to faith in Christ because they were they were disappointed with their own old belief, and they have been regular churchgoers. They became baptized. They were discipled in local churches, but the Migrations Agency have not believed them. They're not even taken the testimony of pastors and church leaders seriously. Several times they said that, well, we don't trust their conversion. They've given them complex and even absurd theological questions, ranging from questions: can you explain the Trinity? Can you number the books of the Old Testament? How does a mass function? And they ask this of a person that goes to a free church, for example, the Pentecostal movement. Or can you mention the number of sacraments? Sometimes we've had officers at the Migration Agency saying that, well, why did you become a Christian? Because it's the same God. This also describes a broader complexity in much of European and also other Western countries, where the state is almost becoming taking theological positions, saying this is real Christianity, this is real Islam, and deciding over the churches how a person should be what a person should believe in order to be considered a true Christian. I don't know if I 2 minutes. All right. So this is for many of us Christians that live in Sweden. This is an absurd situation because Sweden is known for being a country with a big humanitarian heart. We have a large number of our government funds go to foreign aid. We speak out when different minorities are threatened. But taking the word of persecuted Christians is almost like a taboo subject in Sweden, and in also much of Europe, I could add. For example, I mentioned also that Sweden received, in proportion to the rest of Europe and to their own population, a large number of refugees during the refugee crisis. We also had, in proportion to our population, some of the large number of citizens joined ISIS. The Swedish security forces counted that 300 Swedish citizens joined ISIS since 2012, and since then about half have returned to Sweden. Not one have been sentenced to jail. Many of our politicians think that, we could offer them social services and they can be rehabilitated into society, which is absurd. And meanwhile, while we don't do so much about the terrorists that has joined ISIS, many of them are our citizens, we throw out Christian refugees and Yazidis that has fled ISIS and have fled to Sweden to seek refuge. Our migration officers don't let them stay in Sweden. So, yeah, I could go on. The Pentecostal movement in Sweden did also a survey on how the migration agency is handling converts to Christianity. This is the Swedish report, and I have a shorter version in English at the table back there, and you're also welcome to take that. They found 619 people from Afghanistan. They zeroed in on Afghani refugees, and found that about 68% of these refugees were not considered genuine converts by the migration agency. While they had been baptized, they had been discipled, they had been regular churchgoers, many of them were even more active in church than other Swedes were. So, yeah. Thank you for letting me speak on this issue.